Right,
Okay, so if I first of all say that this is not the original engine, unfortunately. When we rebuilt this building that we're in today, we rebuilt the building on the original foundations, and we were fortunate enough to be donated this engine from a clay mine at Jackfield, which is about a mile or so down the road. From photographs and pictures that we've seen, we think the original engine was slightly bigger than this, and we can tell that by the pit for the flywheel. The pit is oversized for this flywheel. The engine was restored in the early 70s. She's been working more or less continuously since. Unfortunately, until only about 2 to 3 years ago, when we had a slight accident with it. It's not worked since. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, if I may. It's a steam-powered engine, obviously. The steam boiler is in the corrugated shed just behind. We don't really talk much about that boiler simply because it's a 1950s boiler, far too modern for a Victorian museum. But in the Victorian age, steam would have been powered or would have been obtained from a boiler in the brickworks just across the canal there. There was a steam pipe that came across the canal to the engine that you see here today. The cable, of course, for the miner's cage, would have been from this drum here, through the hole in the wall there, up to the pulley wheel at the top of the headstocks, and then, shall I say, straight down into the mine shaft. Sadly, a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues overwound the engine, so that basically meant that the cage came bursting through the surface too fast. It hit the underneath of the pulley wheel. Bent the pulley wheel, disintegrated the cage, just as well we haven't got people in that cage. The cable snapped, and we think the sudden change in the load has actually affected this foundation block here. It slightly moved it out of true. Our engineers came and had a good sort of poke around. They confirmed that the engine itself hasn't been damaged, but they have said that the engine is designed to work under a load. And because of the fact that there's no load on it at the moment, they've told us not to use the engine. Everything will be sorted out in the fullness of time. We had hoped it was going to be done this year, but sadly that's not happened. But hopefully within the next couple of years we'll get everything restored to working condition, and you'll actually be able to see the engine working. You won't have to put up with me talking about it for 10 minutes or so.
And this wheel was marked out so that you knew how far down the cage was going?
That's right, yes. The engine man has got a number of guides to help him decide where the cage was. First of all, as you quite rightly say, there's marks on the flywheel which will help him determine that. You can see the amount of cable left on the drum. That will also give him an idea where the cage is. You've got a little sort of model, if that's the right term, on the side of this pillar. That's supposed to represent the 600 feet of the mine shaft with the cage at the top. And again, that will move up and down depending on where the cage is. But to be honest, the main thing that the engine man will rely on is his experience. He will be able to feel he will be able to feel through the levers he's using where that cage is, through the noise that the engine's making as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the engine will make a different sound.
Exactly,
reaching its
yes.
length.
But
yeah.
it's a very, very skilled job. In most mines, including here, the engine man was actually the second highest paid member of staff after the mine manager. So as I say, very skilled job, but it's also a job which required concentration at all times. So when the engine man came on duty in the morning, first thing he'd do is he'd lock both doors. Nobody was allowed in here without his express permission. Not even the mine manager could come in here without the engine man's permission. You can imagine if he lost track of where that cage was, it could result in miners losing their life.
Absolutely.
So it's very, very important that he kept that concentration going. The chair that the engine man would have sat in here, I've previously worked at Beamish Museum in County Durham, and the winding engine that they've got there is a lot bigger than this. But the chair is very, very similar, except that when you look at the chair at Beamish in a little bit more detail, you suddenly realise it's not actually just a chair, it's a commode. So basically that would assume, you would assume from that the engine man doesn't even have time to go to the loo. He has to do his business whilst he's actually working. Now in fairness, the mine at Beamish would have been a lot bigger, a lot busier than this. Here probably he could just sort of nip in, probably have a pot in the corner or something like that, so it wouldn't be a problem for him.
Was this like a day and night shift, or was it just a
On
day?
this particular mine, we think it's purely a day shift. We're not 100% sure, but we've got no records of it being worked 24 hours. The mine itself is relatively small, so although it's deep at 600 feet, if I say to you it never employed more than 16 people, I think probably from that you can assume that it is more than likely just to be a day shift.
Okay.
There were certainly other mines in what is now Telford that were worked 24 hours a day. 48 hours a day. Seems that way. There were certainly other mines, the larger mines, which were worked on 2 or 3 shifts basis. But as I say, I don't think this was one of them, basically. So relatively small. Most of the mines around Madeley are similar size to this, deep, but not necessarily a large footprint underground.
Fantastic.
Does that cover